Deho stood in the briefing room with 20 other candidates, his hands wrapped around a cooling cup of coffee. The orbital station hummed around them, a constant reminder that they were floating above Axis Prime, far from any home world. He took another sip and grimaced. Station coffee was always terrible. Commander Vexillar entered the room with a sharp clicking of mandibles. The insectoid officer's forearms moved independently as he activated the holographic display. His compound eyes swept across the assembled candidates, pausing on Deho for just a moment longer than the others. "You have survived 12 weeks of training," Vexillar's translator rendered his chittering into flat, emotionless words. "Most of you will fail the final test. Those who pass may still be rejected. The Confederation Special Operations Division does not need bodies. We need problem solvers." The hologram shifted to show a barren landscape. Rocky valley, exposed terrain, no natural shelter. Deho recognized it as a simulation environment, but a good one. The kind that could kill you if you made stupid mistakes. 72 hours, Vexillar continued. You will build a refuge capable of withstanding environmental hazards and automated threats. You will receive identical supply packages. No outside assistance. No communication with other candidates. A Krellian candidate raised one of her tentacles. "What defines an adequate refuge, Commander?" "Survival defines adequacy. The simulation will test your structure. If you die, you fail. If your refuge collapses, you fail. If you cannot maintain basic life support, you fail." Vexillar's mandibles clicked again. "Questions?" Deho raised his hand. "Personal items? Under 5 kilograms, approved equipment only. Most candidates bring medical supplies or additional tools." The commander's eyes fixed on him. "What are you thinking, Corporal Kim?" "Just planning ahead, sir." After the briefing, Deho headed to his quarters. His roommate Hana was reviewing star charts at her desk. She looked up when he entered. "So, the final test?" she asked. "Build a shelter. Don't die. Same as every survival course, just with fancier equipment." Deho opened his locker and pulled out his personal coffee machine. It was a compact unit, maybe 3 kilograms with the grounds and filters. His maintenance toolkit added another kilogram. Hana stared at him. "You're bringing coffee equipment to a survival test?" "Coffee is survival equipment." Deho checked the machine's heating element and pressure seals. Everything looked good. "Besides, I did the math. I can spare the weight. Everyone else is bringing extra medical gel or backup power cells, and you're bringing coffee. Everyone else is thinking short term." He set the machine down carefully. 72 hours without decent coffee? That's the real survival challenge. Hana laughed, but her expression turned serious. "I'll be monitoring from the observation deck. Communications array duty. I can't help you, but I can watch. Just keep track of who builds what. I want to know what the competition is doing." "The competition is building shelters, Deho, like normal people." He smiled. "Exactly. The deployment bay was controlled chaos. Candidates checked equipment, sealed supply containers, and prepared for individual drops." Deho secured his coffee machine in its protective case alongside the standard issue supplies. Construction materials, basic tools, a portable power cell, rations, and survival gear. Everything you needed to build a simple refuge and wait out 3 days of simulated hell. Lieutenant Brix, the amphibious tactical instructor, inspected each candidate's gear. When he reached Deho, his gill slits flared. "A coffee maker, Corporal?" "Yes, sir." "Explain the tactical value." "Morale, sir. Clear thinking. Prevents headaches. I work better with coffee." Brix's throat sac inflated slightly, which might have been amusement. "Unconventional. But within regulations. Approved." He moved to the next candidate. Commander Vexillar observed from the upper platform. Deho could feel those compound eyes tracking him. The commander had made his opinion of human candidates clear during training. Too soft, too reliant on technology. Too creative with regulations. That last one had been phrased as a criticism, but Deho took it as a compliment. The drop pods launched in sequence. Deho felt the familiar lurch as his pod detached from the station and began its descent into the simulation zone. The view screen showed the rocky valley growing larger. No vegetation, no water sources. Just rocks, dirt, and hostile environmental conditions. The pod touched down with a solid thud. Deho checked his seals, confirmed atmosphere was breathable, and popped the hatch. Hot air rushed in, carrying the smell of dust and ozone. The simulation's artificial sun beat down from a pale sky. He surveyed his assigned zone, maybe 200 meters in diameter, marked by glowing boundary posts. Rocky hillside to the north, open ground everywhere else. The holographic display in his helmet showed him the supply drop location and confirmed his 72-hour timer had started. Most candidates would immediately start construction. Get walls up, establish basic shelter, then improve from there. Daeho had watched enough training exercises to know the pattern. Fast and functional, that's what the instructors taught. But Vexillar had said something important. They weren't looking for adequate. They were looking for problem solvers. Daeho spent the first hour just walking the perimeter. He took soil samples, tested the rock composition, and mapped the terrain in detail. The hillside had potential. Digging into it would provide natural insulation and protection. The rock was layered, which meant structural integrity if you knew how to work with it. He found a depression near the hill that would collect water if rain came. A few meters away, an outcropping would break wind from the east. Small details, the kind that separated a shelter from a refuge. Back at the supply drop, Daeho unpacked methodically. The construction materials were standard prefab panels designed to slot together quickly. But they could also be cut, shaped, and repurposed. The power cell was meant to run life support and basic lighting. But Daeho saw more potential in it. He set up his coffee machine first. Some might call it a waste of time. Daeho called it establishing priorities. The machine hummed to life, its heating element glowing. While water heated, he began planning his actual build. In orbit, Hana watched her monitor with growing confusion. Most candidates were already framing their structures. Daeho was drinking coffee and drawing diagrams in the dirt. Her communication panel blinked. Private channel. She activated it. He's not building anything. That was Yuna, one of the other monitors. The Xeno-engineer had been watching Daeho's feed with interest. He's planning, Hana replied, or wasting time. Commander Vexillar thinks he's already failed. Hana looked at her screen. Daeho had finished his coffee and was now marking locations on the hillside with stakes. He hasn't failed. He's just thinking bigger than everyone else. This is a survival test, not an engineering competition. For Daeho, everything is an engineering competition. Down in the simulation zone, Daeho began excavating into the hillside. Not a simple dugout, but a proper foundation. The prefab panels weren't going to be walls. They were going to be something better. The power cell wasn't just for lights, and the coffee machine, sitting safely in its protected spot, wasn't just for coffee. It was going to be the heart of a climate control system, because Daeho had read the test parameters carefully. They said to build a refuge capable of withstanding environmental hazards and automated threats. They didn't say it had to be simple. They didn't say it had to be quick, they just said it had to work. Daeho smiled and started digging deeper. He had 71 hours left, a hillside full of useful rock, and a coffee machine that was about to become the most important piece of equipment in his arsenal. The other candidates were building shelters. He was building something better. 24 hours into the test, most candidates had completed their basic shelters. Simple structures with 4 walls, a roof, and minimal life support. They were conserving energy now, waiting for the simulation to throw challenges at them. Daeho was still building. He had excavated 3 chambers into the hillside, using the natural rock as primary structure. The prefab panels weren't walls anymore. He'd cut them into plates and installed them as interior reinforcement, creating a layered defense system. The outer chamber was a buffer zone. The middle chamber was storage and operations. The inner chamber was living space and his command center. The coffee machine sat in the command center, connected to a network of pipes he'd fabricated from supply containers. Daeho had spent 6 hours rigging the heating element and pressure system into something new. The machine didn't just make coffee anymore. It regulated temperature and atmospheric pressure throughout his entire refuge. In orbit, Dr. Yuna watched with fascination. She'd pulled up Daeho's engineering files from the academy, top marks in systems integration, multiple commendations for creative problem solving, 1 official reprimand for making unauthorized modifications to training equipment. He turned a coffee maker into a climate control system, she said to no one in particular. Hana, sitting at the adjacent monitor, grinned. That's so Daeho. Commander Vexillar approached their station. His forearms crossed in what might have been disapproval. Corporal Kim is behind schedule. Other candidates have completed construction and are preparing for challenges. With respect, Commander, Yuna said carefully. Corporal Kim isn't behind schedule. He's on a different schedule. Explain. Yuna highlighted sections of Daeho's structure on her screen. Look at the integration. He's not building a shelter to survive challenges. He's building a system to nullify challenges. Those aren't just walls. That's layered armor with flexible mounting points. That climate control network can handle pressure changes and temperature extremes. He's even installed rudimentary sensors using modified equipment. The test is to build a refuge. Vexillar's mandibles clicked irritably. Not a military installation. The parameters said capable of withstanding environmental hazards and automated threats. He interpreted that more literally than expected. Below, in his refuge, Daeho made another pot of coffee. The machine hummed smoothly and warm air circulated through the chambers. He'd set up basic automation using the power cell's control interface. Not sophisticated but functional. Temperature sensors, pressure monitors, power management. He sipped his coffee and reviewed his work. The structure was solid. Climate control was operational. Now he needed to address the second half of the test parameters. Automated threats meant drones. Drones meant he needed defenses. The construction equipment included powered tools. Drills, cutters, welding torches. All designed for building. But tools were just machines with specific purposes. Change the purpose, change the tool. Daeho started dismantling the equipment. 6 hours later, he had 3 automated turrets mounted at strategic points around his refuge entrance. They weren't sophisticated, just motion sensors linked to repurposed cutting tools. But they would detect and disable incoming drones. Probably, if his calculations were correct. He tested the first turret on a piece of scrap material. The sensor detected movement. The cutting arm swiveled and activated. The scrap metal received a neat line across its surface. Good enough, Daeho muttered. The simulation's warning system activated at hour 30. Environmental challenge incoming. All candidates received the same alert. Category 5 toxic storm approaching. Duration estimated at 6 hours. Daeho sealed his refuge and activated full climate control. The coffee machine kicked into high gear, maintaining internal pressure and filtering atmospheric intake. He settled into his command center with a fresh cup and watched his monitors. Other candidates were sealing shelters and hunkering down. Standard procedure: survive the storm, assess damage afterward, repair as needed. The storm hit like a hammer. Toxic winds carrying corrosive particles. Temperature swings from extreme heat to sudden cold. Pressure changes that would pop eardrums and crack seals. It was designed to test structural integrity and life support systems. Daeho's refuge barely noticed. The layered construction distributed stress evenly. The climate control system compensated for pressure changes automatically. The toxic atmosphere outside never penetrated his filtered air supply. He sat in comfortable temperature drinking coffee while the storm raged uselessly against his walls. In orbit, the observation team watched in silence. One candidate's shelter developed a crack. Emergency protocols activated, but he would lose points for structural failure. Another candidate's life support system strained under the pressure changes. She was conscious but suffering from headache and nausea. She would survive, but barely. Daeho's readings showed stable conditions throughout. Temperature comfortable. Pressure normal. Air quality excellent. His heart rate was actually lower than baseline, probably because he was relaxed. Is he sleeping? Lieutenant Brix asked, staring at the biometric data. Looks like it, Hana confirmed. In the middle of a Category 5 toxic storm, the human is taking a nap. He's also collecting atmospheric samples, Yuna pointed out. She highlighted Daeho's external monitoring system. Look at these readings. He's filtering the storm's toxic particles and storing them. I think he's going to use them as fuel or chemical components. Vexillar leaned closer to the screen. That's not in the parameters. It's not against the parameters either. He's adapting to conditions and improving his resource base. The storm ended after 6 hours. Candidates began unsealing their shelters and assessing damage. Repairs started immediately. Resource consumption had been significant. Most candidates had used at least 30% of their power reserves and 15% of their structural materials. Daeho emerged from his refuge, coffee in hand, and walked the perimeter. His automated turrets had collected debris blown in by the storm. Useful salvage. The atmospheric filters had filled their storage containers with processed particles. He'd have to analyze those later, but they represented raw materials. His power reserves were at 94%. He'd actually gained resources from the storm instead of losing them. He went back inside to run the analysis on his collected materials. The command center was comfortable, well lit, and slightly warmer than outside. The coffee machine hummed in the background. In orbit, Hana opened a private channel to Yuna. How many candidates usually pass this test? 93% completion rate, but only 20% of those get recruited. The test isn't just about survival. It's about how you solve problems under pressure. And Daeho? Yuna smiled. If he keeps this up, he's not just passing, he's rewriting how they evaluate the test. Commander Vexillar stood at his observation post, arms crossed. He had designed this test personally, seen hundreds of candidates go through it. Some succeeded through speed, others through efficient resource management, a few through creative problem solving, but none had ever treated it like an engineering project with unlimited time and resources. The human hadn't just built a shelter. He'd built a fortress with a coffee machine as its heart, and somehow, impossibly, it was working. Vexillar checked the parameters again. The test was designed to escalate. Seismic activity next, followed by hostile drones. Candidates would face progressively difficult challenges until they either failed or demonstrated adequate problem-solving skills. But adequate was subjective, and Corporal Kim had already exceeded adequate by a significant margin. Increase difficulty parameters, Vexillar ordered. Lieutenant Brix turned. Sir, for all candidates? No, just for Corporal Kim. If he wants to over-engineer solutions, let's see how he handles over-engineered problems. Yuna opened her mouth to protest, then closed it. This was technically within Vexillar's authority. The test could be adjusted based on candidate performance. Below in his refuge, Daeho finished analyzing the collected particles. Carbon compounds, trace metals, useful chemicals. He could fabricate basic components with this. Maybe improve his turrets. Maybe add redundancy to his power systems. He made another pot of coffee and started planning improvements. 71 hours remained. Other candidates were rationing supplies and preparing for the next challenge. Daeho was manufacturing spare parts. Hour 48 arrived with a violent shake. Seismic activity as promised. The simulation could generate earthquakes, and this one registered high on the scale. Candidates who had built surface structures watched their walls crack and shift. Emergency repairs began immediately. Daeho felt the tremor through the rock around him, but his refuge held firm. The flexible mounting system he'd designed allowed the interior panels to shift slightly, absorbing the shock rather than resisting it. Earthquake engineering principles borrowed from Earth's Pacific Ring regions. When the ground wanted to move, you let it move, but you controlled how in the command center. His coffee barely rippled in its cup. Seismic event. Magnitude 7.2, he noted, checking his monitors. Structural integrity at 98%. Power system stable. Climate control operational. In orbit, Vexillar watched his carefully escalated challenge fail to impact the human. Again. Increase magnitude, the commander ordered. Sir, that's beyond standard test parameters, Lieutenant Brix warned. Corporal Kim exceeded standard parameters 30 hours ago. We're evaluating his maximum capability. A second tremor hit, stronger than the first. Other candidates struggled to keep their shelters intact. Two abandoned their structures entirely and activated emergency protocols. They would survive but fail the test. Daeho felt this one. The rock around him groaned and shifted. Dust fell from the ceiling. But the structural integrity held. His engineering had accounted for this. Multiple support points, flexible design, natural rock buttressing. The refuge shifted with the earthquake instead of fighting it. One of his automated turrets fell offline. The seismic activity had disrupted its power connection. Daeho made a note to repair it after the tremors stopped. In the adjacent test zone, candidate G1's shelter was not holding up well. She'd built a standard prefab structure, efficient and quick, but the multiple seismic events had cracked the foundation. Structural failure was imminent. Daeho watched it happen on his external sensors. The collapse was slow, almost graceful, walls folding inward, roof panels sliding free. G1 activated her emergency beacon immediately. Smart. The test proctor would send extraction within the hour, but an hour was a long time if your life support failed. And G1's suit readouts showed damage from falling debris. Not critical yet, but getting worse. Daeho sat in his command center, drinking coffee and calculating probabilities. Extraction time through continued seismic activity, 40 to 60 minutes. Ji-won's suit integrity would fail in approximately 30 minutes. She would survive with medical attention, but the timing was tight. The test rules were clear. Candidates could not assist each other. Interference meant immediate disqualification. Daiho had read those rules carefully. Multiple times. He finished his coffee and stood up. The rule said candidates could not interfere. They didn't say anything about equipment. Daiho had 3 automated turrets. 2 were still operational. He'd built them for defense, but they were just machines with manipulator arms and basic AI. Machines could be reprogrammed. 20 minutes later, one of his turrets detached from its mounting and rolled toward the boundary marker. It crossed into Ji-won's test zone, navigated the debris field, and began stabilizing her collapsed shelter. The second turret followed, carrying emergency supplies from Daiho's stockpile. In orbit, alarms started blaring. Candidate interference, a monitor announced. Corporal Kim has sent equipment into another test zone. Vexlar's mandibles clicked rapidly. Disqualify him immediately. Wait, Yuna said, pulling up the test regulations. The rules prohibit candidate interference. His drones aren't candidates. They're equipment. Semantics. Legally binding semantics, Commander. The regulations don't prohibit autonomous systems from crossing boundaries. Only organic candidates. Hana was grinning at her monitor. He actually found a loophole. Lieutenant Brix reviewed the footage. The drone stabilized her shelter, provided medical supplies, and returned to his zone. Candidate Ji-won's beacon is still active, but she's no longer in immediate danger. All within test parameters, technically. Vexlar's 4 arms crossed tightly. Contact Corporal Kim, I want an explanation. The communication channel opened. Corporal Kim, explain your actions. Daiho's voice came through calm and slightly amused. Sir, I identified a potential casualty situation in an adjacent zone. I deployed equipment to stabilize the situation until proper extraction could occur. The test parameters prohibit candidates from interfering with each other. My automated systems aren't candidates. They're tools I built using test resources. You bent the rules. I followed the rules as written, sir. There's a difference, silence on the channel. Then Vexlar's translator rendered what might have been a sigh. Your drones returned to your zone? Yes, sir. With salvaged materials from candidate Ji-won's collapsed structure, she won't need them, and the parameters don't prohibit resource acquisition from failed zones. More silence. Then maintain position, Corporal. Evaluation team will review your interpretation of regulations. The channel closed. In the observation deck, arguments erupted immediately. Half the monitors thought Daiho had violated the spirit of the test. The other half, led by Yuna, argued he'd demonstrated exactly the kind of creative problem-solving the test was designed to evaluate. Admiral Sung arrived during the debate. She was human, senior Confederation officer, and she'd been reviewing test results for potential recruits. The commotion drew her attention. Status? She asked simply. Lieutenant Brix briefed her on Daiho's actions. The fortress, the automated systems, the rescue operation, the regulatory loophole. Sung watched the footage twice. Then she pulled up Daiho's complete file, academy records, training evaluations, psychological profile. She spent 10 minutes reading in silence while the debate continued around her. Finally, she spoke. Commander Vexlar, what is the purpose of this test? To evaluate survival skills and problem-solving capability under pressure. And Corporal Kim demonstrated both. He built a structure that exceeds all survival requirements. He identified a problem outside his immediate situation. He found a solution using available resources without violating explicit regulations. He even acquired additional materials in the process. Sung looked directly at Vexlar. That's not bending rules. That's understanding them better than the people who wrote them. The test is supposed to be difficult. It is difficult. For everyone except him. Which means either he's exceptional, or your test needs revision. Sung turned to the main display. What else does the simulation have? Vexlar hesitated. Ghost Protocol, Admiral. But that's designed for active operatives, not candidates. What's Ghost Protocol? Stealth infiltration units. They bypass defenses, sabotage infrastructure, capture targets. We use it to train special operations teams for high-threat scenarios. Sung considered this. Has it ever been used in qualification testing? No, Admiral. It's considered too dangerous. Deploy it. If Corporal Kim wants to play with advanced systems, Let's see how he handles real special operations scenarios. The observation deck went quiet. Even Yuna looked concerned. Ghost Protocol wasn't meant for candidates who'd been awake for 48 hours building fortresses. It was meant for rested teams with complete tactical support. Lieutenant Brix voiced the obvious concern. Admiral, if he's exhausted and unprepared, Ghost Protocol could result in actual injury. Then he'll fail and we'll extract him. But I don't think he's unprepared. Sung pointed at the screen showing Daeho's refuge. Look at his structure. Those aren't just defensive turrets. That's a layered sensor network. Those aren't just reinforced walls. That's modular design with multiple fallback positions. He didn't build a shelter. He built a military installation. Let's see if he can defend it. Vexlar's mandibles clicked in what might have been approval. Deploying Ghost Protocol. Authorization Sung 7 Alpha. The simulation adjusted. New parameters loaded. Infiltration units activated and began approaching Daeho's test zone. Below, in his fortress, Daeho was repairing the turret damaged during the seismic event. His sensors picked up unusual signatures at the edge of his detection range. Not drones. Something else. Something designed to avoid detection. He set down his tools and walked to the command center. Fresh coffee was brewing. He was going to need it. The test had just changed and Daeho had no idea how much. The infiltration units were good. Really good. They moved with a precision that standard drones lacked, using terrain and thermal camouflage to mask their approach. Designed to defeat military installations, not candidate refugees. Daeho stared at his sensor displays and felt his stomach tighten. Those weren't test drones. Those were combat units. Someone had escalated far beyond normal parameters. He took a long drink of coffee and started thinking. Standard defensive doctrine assumed you knew where threats were coming from. His turrets covered obvious approach vectors. His sensors monitored standard detection ranges. But these infiltration units were designed to bypass exactly those defenses. So he needed to think differently. Daeho pulled up his sensor logs and analyzed the anomalies. Tiny fluctuations in electromagnetic readings, minor thermal variations, vibration patterns that didn't match wind or seismic activity. Each anomaly was too small to trigger alerts on its own, but together they painted a picture. 3 units, possibly 4, circling his position at maximum sensor range. Probing for weaknesses, he activated his communication system. This is Corporal Kim. I'm detecting unknown units approaching my test zone, requesting confirmation of test parameters. The response came from Commander Vexlar. Parameters have been updated based on your performance, Corporal. Respond accordingly. Sir, these units are beyond candidate-level threats. Correct. They're Ghost Protocol infiltration units, used for training active special operations personnel. Consider it a compliment. Daeho closed the channel and swore quietly. A compliment that could get him captured or injured. Wonderful. But if they wanted to see how he'd respond to real threats, he'd show them. First priority, improve his sensor coverage. The infiltration units were good at avoiding detection, but nothing was invisible. Everything left a signature. You just had to know where to look. Daeho repurposed his coffee machine's pressure sensors. They were designed to detect atmospheric changes for climate control, but pressure sensors could also detect movement through air displacement. He networked them with his existing sensors, creating overlapping detection fields. Next, defensive depth. His turrets covered the obvious approaches, but infiltration units wouldn't use obvious approaches. He needed layered defenses. Daeho pulled up his stockpile and started improvising. The debris from G1's shelter included structural panels and power couplings. The materials he'd collected from the toxic storm included reactive compounds. He could make pressure-sensitive floor plates. Nothing explosive, just alert systems. If something stepped where it shouldn't, he'd know. Hour 52. The infiltration units stopped probing and started their approach. Daeho watched them on his improved sensor network. 4 units confirmed. They were spreading out, planning synchronized attack from multiple vectors. Classic infiltration tactics. Overwhelmed defenses through coordination. His automated turrets detected movement and swiveled to track. The infiltration units immediately withdrew, staying just outside effective range. They were learning his defensive capabilities. Adapting, so Daeho adapted too. He activated his communication system and broadcast on the emergency frequency. Attention all candidates. Hostile units now active in test zones. Update defensive protocols accordingly. In orbit, Yuna looked shocked. He's warning the other candidates. Hana laughed. No. He's making the infiltration units think there are still other candidates. Confusion tactic. The infiltration units paused. Their programming included avoiding detection by multiple targets. If other candidates were still active, the units would need to adjust their approach. It bought Daeho time. He used that time to finish his pressure plate sensors and install them around his perimeter. Then he did something unexpected. He turned off half his external sensors. In the observation deck, Lieutenant Brix frowned. Why is he reducing his detection capability? Admiral Sung smiled slightly. He's not. He's setting a trap. Watch. The infiltration units detected the reduced sensor coverage and interpreted it as a system failure. An opening. They adjusted their approach, moving toward the apparent blind spot, exactly where Daeho had installed his new pressure sensors. The first unit crossed the perimeter and triggered an alert. Daeho's automated turrets swiveled immediately, no longer tracking predictable patterns but responding to actual confirmed positions. The infiltration unit dodged, but its thermal camouflage was less effective when it was moving quickly. Daeho launched one of his reprogrammed drones, the one that had rescued Jiwon. It wasn't designed for combat, but it didn't need to be. It just needed to be annoying. The drone harassed the infiltration unit, forcing it to spend processing power on evasion instead of infiltration. Two more infiltration units tried different approaches. One attempted to breach through the rocky hillside, avoiding the perimeter entirely, but Daeho had installed vibration sensors in the rock. He detected the movement and activated countermeasures. Not weapons, just noise and light, enough to disrupt the unit's stealth systems. The fourth unit tried the direct approach. Fast assault through the main entrance, betting on speed over stealth. It made it past the turrets and hit the pressure plates. Alarms blared. Automated lockdown activated. The entrance sealed, trapping the unit in the outer chamber. Daeho watched from his command center as the infiltration unit tried to breach the inner doors. It was designed for infiltration and sabotage, not forced entry against reinforced barriers. After 2 minutes of failed attempts, the unit withdrew, but it couldn't withdraw. The entrance was sealed. The unit was trapped in a chamber with no exits and increasingly uncomfortable atmospheric conditions. Daeho had depressurized the outer chamber and filled it with some of the reactive compounds from the toxic storm. Not dangerous, just very unpleasant for sensitive equipment. The infiltration unit stopped moving. Its systems were intact, but it couldn't complete its mission. Functional capture hour 56. 3 infiltration units remained outside. They'd adapted to Daeho's defenses but hadn't found a way through. They shifted to siege tactics. If they couldn't infiltrate, they'd wait and probe for weaknesses over time. Daeho settled in for a long defensive operation. He had resources, power, and an increasingly well-fortified position. The infiltration units had patience and sophisticated programming. It became a waiting game. In orbit, the observation team watched with fascination. Coast Protocol was designed to infiltrate and disable targets quickly, but Daeho had turned his refuge into a puzzle box. Every approach had a counter. Every weakness was a trap. Hour 60. Daeho finished his analysis of the captured infiltration unit. He couldn't dismantle it completely without better tools, but he could study its external systems. Thermal camouflage, electromagnetic dampening, vibration isolation, all designed to avoid detection. He started making notes. If he could replicate even basic versions of these systems, he could improve his own drones. Hour 64. The siege continued. The infiltration units were tireless, but Daeho had something they didn't. He could adapt faster than their programming could update. Every probe they made gave him information. Every withdrawal taught him their patterns. He started modifying his exterior drones with scavenged stealth components from the captured unit. Not perfect replication, but good enough. His drones became harder to track, harder to predict. Hour 68. Daeho deployed his modified drones outside his perimeter. They didn't attack the infiltration units. They just confused them. Signals that looked like friendly units. Movements that suggested reinforcements. The infiltration unit's programming struggled to adapt. Were these new threats? Malfunctioning allies? Unknown variables? Daeho broadcast another false message. Perimeter secure. Requesting extraction for captured hostile unit. The infiltration units interpreted this as a priority target. The captured unit was valuable intelligence. They had to prevent its extraction. All 3 remaining units converged on Daeho's position simultaneously. Exactly what he wanted. The coordinated assault triggered every defensive system he'd prepared. Turrets engaged from overlapping fields of fire. Pressure plates revealed exact positions. Modified drones harassed and confused. The infiltration units found themselves in a kill zone of their own making. 2 units withdrew immediately, recognizing the trap. The 3rd pressed forward, trying to breach through sheer persistence. Daeho sealed another entrance and trapped it in a secondary chamber. 2 captured units now. The remaining infiltration units retreated to maximum range and stopped. Their programming had finally recognized the situation. They couldn't win. The target was too well defended, too adaptive, too unpredictable. In orbit, Admiral Sung nodded slowly. Terminate Ghost Protocol. The evaluation is complete. Vexlar looked at her. The test still has 4 hours remaining. Corporal Kim isn't being tested anymore. He's training our infiltration AI new defensive scenarios. She gestured at the screen. He captured 2 units and defeated a siege by military-grade hardware, using coffee-powered climate control and improvised sensors. This isn't a candidate. This is a specialist. Hour 72 arrived. The test timer expired. Across the simulation zones, candidates unsealed their refuges and awaited extraction. Daeho emerged from his fortress with a cup of coffee in hand. 2 captured infiltration units secured in his outer chambers. Complete. The debriefing room was quieter than Daeho expected. 21 candidates sat in rows waiting for individual evaluations. Most looked exhausted but satisfied. They had survived 72 hours of environmental hazards and hostile drones. That was an accomplishment. Daeho sat in the back row finishing a cup of station coffee. Still terrible, but he was too tired to care. Hana had snuck him a message saying the evaluation team was arguing about his performance. That could be good or very bad. Commander Vexlar entered with Admiral Sung and Lieutenant Brix. The room fell silent. Most of you performed adequately, Vexlar began. You built functional refuges. You survived the challenges. You demonstrated basic problem-solving skills. 15 of you will receive passing marks for this evaluation. A pause. Some candidates smiled with relief. Others looked disappointed. 6 of you exceeded expectations. Your approaches showed creativity and adaptability beyond standard training. You will be considered for recruitment into Special Operations Divisions. Another pause. Daeho noticed Vexlar's compound eyes sweep toward him. One of you, the commander continued, his mandibles clicking slowly, rewrote the parameters of the test entirely. Now everyone was looking at Daeho. Corporal Kim, front. Daeho stood and walked to the front of the room. He was very aware of 20 pairs of eyes following him. This was either a commendation or a very public failure. Admiral Sung stepped forward. Corporal, your performance has generated significant debate among the evaluation team. Some believe you violated the spirit of the test. Others argue you demonstrated exceptional capability. Before we announce our decision, we want to hear your perspective. Why did you build what you built? Daeho thought carefully before answering. Ma'am, the test parameters requested a refuge capable of withstanding environmental hazards and automated threats. I interpreted that to mean a structure that could protect against any challenge the simulation could generate. Not just survive them, but nullify them. You brought a coffee machine to a survival test. Yes, ma'am. Coffee is essential for my cognitive function. I work better with proper coffee. Everything else followed from that priority. Lieutenant Brix made a sound that might have been amusement. You built a fortress to protect your coffee. No, sir. I built a fortress because the test asked for a refuge. The coffee machine was just the most efficient climate control system available with my resources. The fact that it also makes coffee was a beneficial secondary function. Silence. Then Admiral Sung smiled. It was a small smile, but genuine. You deployed autonomous systems to rescue another candidate. The parameters prohibited candidates from interfering with each other. My equipment isn't a candidate, and candidate Jiwon's situation required immediate response that standard extraction couldn't provide safely. You found a regulatory loophole. I followed the regulations as written, ma'am, and when we deployed Ghost Protocol against you, Daeho paused. This was the critical moment. Ma'am, I recognize the units as beyond standard test parameters. But I also recognize them as a problem to solve. I adapted my defenses, improved my sensor coverage, and used the infiltration unit's own programming against them. 2 units captured, 3 defeated, 0 breaches of my refuge. You weren't afraid? I was concerned, ma'am. But fear doesn't solve problems. Engineering does. Admiral Sung turned to address the room. The purpose of this test is to identify candidates who can think beyond standard procedures, who can adapt to unexpected situations, who can find solutions when conventional approaches fail. Corporal Kim demonstrated all of these capabilities at an exceptional level. She looked back at Daeho. However, you also demonstrated a tendency to interpret instructions in ways that benefit your objectives. You bend rules. You find loopholes. You over-engineer solutions until problems become advantages. In a military organization, that can be problematic. Daeho's stomach sank. He was about to fail despite everything. In special operations, Sung continued, those traits are essential. Congratulations, Corporal. You not only passed this evaluation, you've been directly recruited into Advanced Systems Division. Your fortress design is being analyzed for potential implementation in forward operating bases. The room erupted in murmurs. Daeho stood very still, processing what he just heard. Additionally, Commander Vexlar added, his tone neutral, your approach has been designated as Fortress Protocol. Future candidates will study your methodology as an example of extreme adaptive engineering. I am personally irritated by this, but I acknowledge its effectiveness. Daeho allowed himself a small smile. Thank you, Commander. The evaluations continued. Candidate Ji-won passed with commendation for her crisis management, despite structural failure. 5 others received recruitment offers. The remaining candidates received completion certificates and encouragement to reapply after additional training. After the formal briefing ended, Dr. Yuna approached Daeho. I've been assigned to work with you on analyzing your fortress design. The engineering team wants to understand how you integrated so many systems with such limited resources. It wasn't that complicated, Daeho said honestly. Just creative reinterpretation of equipment functions. You turned a coffee machine into climate control. That's not simple reinterpretation. The machine already regulated heat and pressure. I just scaled up its function and networked it with other systems. Basic systems integration. Yuna shook her head, smiling. Most engineers see equipment as fixed-purpose tools. You see them as modular components. That's rare, Hana joined them, grinning. I watched the whole thing from orbit. When you deployed your drones to rescue G1, Vexlar nearly had a system failure. When you captured 2 Ghost Protocol units, I thought Admiral Sung was going to recruit you on the spot. She did recruit me, eventually. After making you sweat through that speech. Typical Admiral move. Daeho looked around the briefing room. Other candidates were celebrating or consoling each other. Instructors were filing reports. Everything was returning to normal routine. What happens now? He asked. Now, Yuna said, you help us figure out how to replicate your fortress design on a larger scale. The Confederation has forward bases that could benefit from your climate control integration, your defensive layering approach, your adaptive sensor networks, and your coffee machine modifications, Hana added. Apparently, several human personnel have formally requested better coffee systems in remote installations. That's a legitimate tactical concern, Daeho said seriously. Cognitive performance degrades without proper stimulant access. You're going to fit right in with special operations, Yuna laughed. 2 weeks later, Daeho stood in a new facility. Not the academy, but a proper military research station. His workstation had been upgraded with better tools, more resources, and most importantly, a premium coffee machine. The Fortress Protocol documentation was nearly complete. It included detailed schematics, resource management strategies, defensive integration principles, and climate control networking. Military engineers across the Confederation were reviewing it for implementation. Daeho's first official assignment was consulting on a forward operating base design for a high-risk zone. The base needed to withstand extreme conditions and potential hostile action with minimal supply lines. He pulled up the specifications and started planning. The parameters requested defensive capability and environmental protection. Basic requirements, but Daeho saw more potential than that. 3 months later, the forward operating base was completed. It featured redundant climate control systems based on Daeho's coffee machine integration, layered defensive networks using adaptive sensor arrays, modular construction allowing rapid reconfiguration, and a recreational facility with excellent coffee. The base commander sent a personal message. I requested a defensive position. You built a fortress that happens to have the best coffee in this sector. Thank you. Deho sat in his research station reviewing the next assignment. Another base design. More challenging parameters. Hostile environment. Limited resources. Extreme threat level. He made a fresh pot of coffee and started planning. The assignment parameters said to design a viable defensive installation. They didn't say it couldn't be comfortable. They didn't say it couldn't be over-engineered. They didn't say it couldn't have excellent coffee. On his desk sat a small plaque. A gift from the Academy evaluation team. It read, the lab test was to build a refuge. The human built a fortress with a coffee machine. Underneath in smaller text, Fortress Protocol. Established by Corporal Deho Kim, Confederation Special Operations, Advanced Systems Division. And at the very bottom, added in pen by Hana, humanity, fuck yeah. Deho smiled and went back to his designs. He had bases to plan, systems to integrate, and coffee to drink. Somewhere in the Confederation, candidates were taking the qualification test. They would build refuges and demonstrate adequate problem-solving skills. But Deho had set a new standard. Not just survival, not just adequacy, but engineering excellence with a properly caffeinated foundation. The next generation of candidates would study Fortress Protocol and learn that humans didn't just solve problems. They over-engineered solutions until the problems became advantages. They found loopholes in regulations. They adapted faster than challenges could evolve. And they never ever compromised on coffee quality.